It all begins in a luxurious hall of a castle, and there was a banquet going on to honor someone. Several servants circulate the room serving the guests, commenting on how young Master Isaac received a recommendation for the Royal Academy at just 10 years of age, proving to be a true genius. Arriving with more dishes, the nanny also congratulates him on the joyous date, letting him know she prepared all his favorite foods for the celebration. The boy is visibly happy with all the attention he is receiving. Thanking the nanny for her affection, Isaac is quite polite to the staff. At that moment, another servant approaches handing him a gift box, leaving the boy surprised, as he did not think receiving something like that was necessary. The man, named Hans, makes a point of giving the souvenir, recalling that when his son fell ill, it was the young master himself who brought the medicine that saved his life. Making it clear that it was no big deal compared to the boy's well-being, Isaac gladly accepts the gift. Right after, his younger brother, Jonas, appears holding a lute and announces he will play a song in his honor. Hans comments excitedly about the little boy's exceptional skills, recalling that even the court musician recently praised him, calling him a prodigy. Interested in hearing his brother's talent, Isaac asks him to start the performance. Excited about the opportunity, little Jonas gets ready to play. As soon as he strums the first chords on the instrument, the vibe of the memory shatters with a desperate scream begging him to stop. Waking up abruptly from the nightmare, an older man screams in panic in bed. Catching his breath in the dark of the room, the guy realizes that it was all just a dream. He regrets his own foolishness for still reliving those memories. Looking out at the night courtyard through the window, the MC accepts that there is no going back to that time. Footsteps echo down the silent hallway, getting closer to where he is. The small metal hatch on the wooden door is opened from the outside in. Entering the room with a lamp and a tray of food, the servant Lucas wishes the young master a good morning. Looking at the guy, he immediately notices that something is wrong. Worried about the master's paleness, Lucas asks if he had a nightmare, while Isaac just mumbles the employee's name. Rubbing his tired face, the MC explains that he dreamed about things from 20 years ago. Placing the tray on the table, the servant comments that it has been a long time and advises the master not to dwell on such old memories. To try and cheer him up, he suggests trying the fresh cheese he just brought along with the stew. Furthermore, he lets him know that as soon as the meal is over, the two will do the sword training the guy skipped the day before. But Isaac's mind is still stuck in the past, remembering that back then, 1 month before entering the academy, he caught a really severe flu. The illness dragged on for 3 months with no sign of improvement, forcing his father, Count Goethe, to seek the help of a scholar from the Magic Tower. Evaluating the situation with the boy's father, the specialist informed them that he had a rather unusual physical constitution. The scholar explained that every living being is born with their own vessel for mana, and the energy circulates at a pace suited to that natural limit. However, the circulation in young Isaac's body was completely abnormal, being extremely fast and intense for his age. The diagnosis pointed out that if the situation continued like that, his internal vessel would end up shattering. The harsh truth soon became a reality when the mana inside the boy overflowed like a broken dam, aggressively colliding with the energy of the outside environment. This triggered a devastating magical shockwave around him. The blast destroyed a large part of the family's mansion, leaving countless people fatally injured or completely gone. The phenomenon became even more terrifying because the energy would calm down for a while only to erupt later without any warning, keeping everyone in constant panic. The final straw occurred when one of these blasts destroyed his younger brother's right hand. Facing his own father's horrified look, the boy desperately begged to be locked away. Crying his eyes out, he demanded to be isolated from the rest of humanity. He wanted to be taken to a place where absolutely no one could get close. That way, no one else would end up getting hurt because of his lack of control. Back in the present, while chewing a piece of bread in the dark room, Isaac calculates that he must have been around 15 years old when he made that drastic decision. Suddenly, a violent cough breaks the silence of the room. Startled by the sudden noise, the guy quickly turns around and calls the employee's name. The servant's hand is completely stained with his own blood. Observing the gravity of the situation, Isaac notes that this is a clear symptom of mana poisoning, a direct consequence of the excessive time the man spent by his side. Handing the employee a cloth to clean himself up, the MC scolds him, saying that this is what happens when he stays there unnecessarily, ordering him to rest for at least 1 month. Calmly wiping his mouth, Lucas jokes, asking if he will be fired for insubordination, ironically reminding him that the master has no other friends besides him. Walking toward the exit, the servant asks Isaac not to worry about his health. He tries to ease the tension by stating that even though the master caused dozens of blasts in the past, he himself never suffered a single scratch. With a confident look, Lucas guarantees there will be no one more qualified for the job. But the MC warns that a single security slip could cost him his life. Turning his back, the employee tells the master to go meditate and stop bothering him with these worries. Before leaving, he sincerely states that it has been a true pleasure serving him all these years. The heavy confinement door closes with a dull thud, leaving the environment isolated once again. In an instant, the memory of the voice congratulating him echoes in Isaac's mind, making the guy freeze in terror. Sitting at his table, he feels the lethal aura of his own energy manifesting out of control. A fierce red blast erupts from the room, taking down the structure of the property's night courtyard. In deep despair, the guy hears the distant screams outside, recognizing Hans's voice crying out for help. Amid the hallucination of his old, shattered dining room, the shadowy figure of Lucas appears standing on the table. The servant's bloodied face appears in his vision, marking the tragic end of the one who stayed by his side for so long. Falling off the bed in complete despair, the MC tries to process the weight of the situation. Pain takes over him as he realizes that Lucas is truly gone. On that fateful day, another uncontrollable blast occurred, and the image of the servant leaving while coughing up blood was the last physical memory he kept. After the incident, the employee went over a year without appearing at the hatch until the official news of his passing was delivered by Isaac's father. Consumed by guilt, the master completely locked his door to never receive anyone else again. Hidden under the covers, he tortures himself thinking he should have kept his distance from everyone instead of getting attached. Regret dictates his thoughts as he reflects that the right thing to do would have been to treat everyone with absolute coldness. The painful memory of Hans and his family's smiles only reinforces the idea that the tragedy needed to be avoided from the very beginning. With extreme isolation, the years simply slipped away through time, marked by the piles of untouched bread accumulating in the hallway. An aged, trembling hand grabs a dried-out piece of food, proving that, as bad as the situation was, he was still breathing. Chewing the hard meal, the MC decides he needs to move forward, even if his body already bears the fragile appearance of an elderly man. During the more than 30 years living locked in the basement, he dove deep into studying his own condition, exhausting all available literary knowledge. With no more research material to consult, he had to look for answers through intuition and silent meditation. Sporting a long white beard, old Isaac finally hears a mysterious voice announcing the end of his lonely wait. The mysterious voice echoes in the MC's mind, questioning if he can face infinity completely alone in a world inhabited only by him and the mana, demanding that the old man know himself deeply. And after many years, he finally found a fundamental clue to overcome his dangerous magical constitution. While chewing a piece of hard bread, Isaac wonders if something happened to his family, since the research materials kept arriving non-stop to his captivity. He spent most of his time focused, studying the glowing stones and drawing runic circles in his isolation. But an unexpected sound near the entrance breaks the silence and catches the old man's attention. Looking at the countless scratch marks on the wall, the MC calculates he must already be 71 years old. At that moment, a familiar voice calls him brother, through the heavy wooden confinement door. Confirming his identity right after, Jonas asks if the master is sleeping. Surprised by the unusual visit, Isaac approaches the exit, questioning what brings the guy there after so much time. Sporting an eye patch and with a face aged by time, his brother calmly asks if he can come into the room. Fearing causing another unforgivable tragedy, the MC clenches his fists near the lock and orders him to stay where he is so they can talk from there. The two then sit on the stone floor leaning on opposite sides of the door, with the older brother asking how he has been, receiving the answer that it is a very long story. Sighing heavily in the dark hallway, Jonas asks if Isaac knew that that exact day marked the anniversary of their father's passing. The master is visibly shaken by the shocking news and immediately asks how the patriarch passed away. Warning that it would be a lengthy tale, the visitor offers to tell everything, and the MC immediately agrees to listen. To properly explain the whole situation, Jonas warns he will need to go back 30 years in time, starting with the succession war between the dynasty's first and second princes. The long account of the tragic family events continues to weigh heavily in the dark, lonely environment. The conversation brings up forgotten memories from when the two were still little and used to spend their days side by side. After listening to everything in silence, old Isaac praises his younger brother's talent for storytelling, admitting he even lost track of time while paying attention. The man in the hallway confesses that, if he had known everything would end in such a tragic way, he would have spent his days wandering and lived freely as a poet. Changing the tone of the conversation, the MC comments with some irony that it would be a bit hard having only one hand to work with. An agonizing silence takes over the place before Jonas sincerely apologizes for the way things happened in the past. Isaac squeezes his own hands tightly as he feels the pain of the memories, while his brother continues his long venting session. Holding back tears, the visitor confesses that both their parents and he himself held a deep resentment towards the master for a long time. Those harsh words hit the old man right in the chest, leaving him not knowing how to react. But right after, the youngest brother admits that the whole family always missed having him around terribly, and he reinforces with an open heart that they all loved him intensely, despite any tragedy. Suddenly, the man begins coughing up blood on the stone floor and laments his own condition, saying he just wanted to see his older brother's face one last time. Worried about his health state, the MC questions the reason for that farewell, hearing that a magical gate opened out of nowhere while the war tore the kingdom apart. Already losing his strength and collapsing in the hallway, Jonas asks that the master at least manages to live the rest of his days in absolute peace. His weak and failing voice mumbles that he should have come to visit a little earlier to make the most of their time. Looking down at his own shoe, Isaac alarmingly notices a thick pool of blood seeping under the crack of the confinement door. Without thinking twice, he unlocks the heavy metal structure and steps out of isolation after decades locked away. The old man soon finds his brother's body passed out in the dark, dirty hallway. Panic takes over the MC as he faces the visitor's critical state. Realizing that Jonas had a blade lodged in his back, he marvels at how the guy managed to talk normally for so long under those fatal conditions. Kneeling beside the pool of blood, Isaac states with determination that they are leaving, as his little brother could not stay tossed on the cold floor. Placing the body over his shoulders, he climbs the long basement stairs, carrying the weight of the loss. Exhaustion hits the master halfway up, who soon finds it odd how light the man's body feels. Gripping the torn clothes tightly so as not to drop him, he agonizingly wonders how long the guy had gone without a proper meal. Finally reaching the top of the stairs, Isaac pushes the double doors open and faces the vastness outside. He has to shield his face with his arm to get used to the brightness after 30 years living in complete darkness. What reveals itself before his eyes is a scene of pure war devastation, with the immense family property reduced to flaming ruins. Walking slowly through the destroyed courtyard, the old man carries his brother's body amidst the rubble and the ice of that desolate battlefield. Feeling the small snowflakes falling on his hand, the MC murmurs in resignation that he will bury Jonas in the family cemetery. Decided on how things will go, he tells the wind that right after he too will finally go to rest. The unforgiving winter covers the silent and melancholic landscape around the old trees. After digging the grave on the lawn and holding the burial, the master stands facing the tombs of his loved ones in the preserved cemetery. With the small magical stone firmly gripped in his hand, he focuses on concentrating all the vast energy accumulated in his worn-out body. A flaming aura erupts instantly, wrapping the old man in a pillar of absolute and finally stabilized power. Feeling that he managed to master his birth curse, he asks the void if his little brother managed to see that impossible feat. With the magical fire burning in perfect harmony over his skin, Isaac celebrates having achieved total mastery of his constitution. Exhausted by the extreme use of mana, he lets the crystal fall to the ground and questions if his burden is now over. His fragile body wavers and falls face down on the cold earth of the cemetery. In his final seconds, the MC silently wonders if he could be forgiven for the tragedies, even if just a little bit. The fading man's mind drifts back to the destroyed courtyard, regretting that things could have been different if he had acted faster instead of giving in completely to despair in the basement. The regret weighs heavily as he imagines if the war and the losses could have been avoided with his actions and tamed powers. The old master then surrenders to the exhaustion, taking his final breath on his family soil. Suddenly, a warm beam of light hits his face, accompanied by a voice calling him young master and asking if he had a bad nightmare. His blurry vision slowly reveals Hans's welcoming face, leaving the MC completely paralyzed with confusion. The soft sound of the curtains opening makes him think it was a hallucination, since the servant had already passed away from old age a long time ago. In a snapback to reality, the boy's blue eyes widen in pure, absolute shock. The guy sits up abruptly on the luxurious bed, panting desperately as he tries to process where he is. Dressed in his old butler attire, Hans immediately notices that the master woke up in a cold sweat with a very pale face. Finishing tidying up the spacious, bright room, the employee casually asks if he stayed up all night. Staring at his own rejuvenated hands, the MC deduces he is trapped in an illusion of his mind, or seeing his life flash before his eyes at the exact moment of his passing. Not understanding the boy's stunned and silent reaction, the servant calls him by his title to see if he is feeling sick, but Isaac jumps out of bed and rushes to the room's large window upon hearing desperate screams warning of danger in the lower garden. The childish, annoyed voice outside replies that he is perfectly fine, immediately catching the MC's attention. Looking through the bars of the sunny balcony, he spots something that leaves him completely breathless. Hanging high up in a huge tree and holding a wooden toy, little Jonas waves excitedly calling for his older brother. The emotional impact hits the guy hard, as he sees his little brother overflowing with health and with both hands completely intact. Down below, one of the mansion's maids keeps jumping in panic, begging the boy to come down from the branches before he gets into a serious accident. Gripping the window's iron bars with disproportionate strength, Isaac feels his own body tremble from head to toe. And with his heart practically pounding out of his chest, the boy finally accepts that none of it is a dream, understanding that he somehow went back in time. Standing by the bright window, the MC reflects that he really went back to the past, being the one who started this journey. The mysterious voice from his previous life echoes in his mind, questioning if he, being completely alone, can face infinity on his own. The entity demands that he know himself in a solitary world where only he and the mana exist. Isaac looks over his shoulder and remembers the order to get rid of the perspectives engraved in his life and break free from the chains of the past. All this to finally become who he truly is. The boy gets a sharp look full of determination with these memories, but the scene quickly cuts to a pile of shattered cups and plates on the floor. The maids clean up the mess in the luxurious room while complaining that the young master's unusual condition caused trouble again, fearing when the next blast will happen. Opening the heavy door, Hans overhears the gossip and ponders that the boy's temper only gets more sensitive every day due to the pain. Annoyed by the employee's audacity, the servant gets ready to teach them a lesson right then and there. At that, the MC firmly grabs the butler's shirt sleeve and tells him to let it go. Calmly pulling the fabric, Isaac shows he does not care about the mean comments. He also warns that the man should stop going in there since he ended up getting hurt again just by being by his side. Understanding the concern, Hans kneels in front of the boy and guarantees he still likes him a lot regardless. The employee tries to comfort the boy, saying he is just going through a tough phase. Shaken, the boy thinks that when all this is over, there will be nothing left. He clearly remembers that Hans was the one who said those kind words of comfort. The man ended up losing his own life in a tragic way in one of the explosions caused by him in the past. Carrying immense guilt, Isaac realizes that everyone fell because they cared about him, taking responsibility for being the reason those people lost their lives. Bringing to mind the image of his brother playing in the tree, the MC decides what needs to be done if that situation is truly his new reality. With this back to the room, he calls the servant's name in a serious tone. Promptly, the employee answers, awaiting the young master's orders. Without mincing words, the boy tells the man to get out of there immediately. Turning around abruptly, Isaac aggressively demands that he disappear from his sight right now. The butler stays silent for a moment at the sudden order. Even surprised, Hans complies with the request and lets him know he got the message. He presses his fist hard against the wall, convincing himself that this is the right choice since keeping others around would only put them in extreme danger. With his hand on the doorknob to leave, the servant kindly asks the boy not to try and carry all this burden completely alone. The large door slowly closes as the man advises that sometimes it is okay to trust them too. Looking at his own hand, Isaac realizes he does not remember the employee saying something like that before, wondering if this scene is nothing but a dream shaped by his desire to hear those words. To test the situation, he slaps himself really hard in the face. Feeling his skin sting, the boy realizes in shock that the pain is very real. Confused by the realization, Isaac wonders if he really went back in time and what his passing in the snowy cemetery meant. He goes back to watching the peaceful movement in the property's courtyard down below. Accepting the second chance, the MC decides that it doesn't matter if all this is a dream or pure reality. What really matters is that he absolutely cannot let another mana blast happen no matter what. His mind drifts to the past, remembering that a long time ago, there was another person who suffered from this same unusual constitution. The man's name was Zeke von Gotha, his great-great-grandfather and the only mage in history to reach the 10th class of power, an unreachable realm for any other human. During his years living locked in the basement, Isaac learned a lot about this ancestor through the records passed down by his father. And after studying those ancient documents in detail for several years, he finally found a way to overcome this terrible condition. The solution consisted of creating a specific runic stone. It was a unique pattern born from a lot of research, which when carved into a magic stone, turned it into a powerful tool. Already holding a blue crystal, the boy thinks it is a good idea to do this now, remembering that in his old age, his hands shook too much during the process. Analyzing the inner workings of his energy, he explains that to stop the blasts, his natural vessel needs to be able to withstand the mana circulating non-stop. However, in his case, the energy runs at such an insane and fierce speed that the vessel simply cannot handle the impact. For a normal person, the moment the vessel breaks means instant doom, but in the MC's body, it restores itself as if nothing happened. Being a true natural disaster, that was why he exploded repeatedly throughout his life without ever actually falling. Positioning a small sharp tool over the blue crystal, the boy explains that the theoretical stone serves exactly to intentionally damage the mana circulation paths. With a scratch made on the surface, the damaged parts begin to receive a constant impact from the energy. This process ends up opening new secondary channels, effectively dispersing the shock of the raging mana. Satisfied with the item in his hands, Isaac highlights that he had only managed to succeed with this technique moments before passing away from old age. The small spark he produced at the time already served as absolute proof that it worked, leaving him anxious to test it again. Concentrating on the palm of his own hand, the boy tries to summon the magical energy. A bright, lively flame soon ignites in the air. The fire quickly expands into an intense swirl of heat that easily wraps around the boy's entire arm. He is completely amazed witnessing that power flowing without causing destruction. The intensity of the flames makes him lean his torso slightly backward, but his excitement is interrupted by a sudden crack coming from the stone. The accumulated energy starts breaking through the internal barriers of Isaac's body in a violent impact. Unable to withstand the absurd pressure, the runic stone itself begins to crack dangerously in his hand. The artifact shatters into several pieces, dissipating the aggressive wave of fire around it. The boy watches the last traces of smoke fading in the air, confirming his initial suspicions. Sweaty and apprehensive, he notes with relief that the technique really works, now allowing him to manifest 3 spells at the same time, each with its own size and nature. Clenching his fist, the MC quickly corrects himself, remembering that this is not his true goal there. Standing in the middle of the elegant room, he reflects on the next steps. Isaac understands that just 3 open channels won't be enough to contain the monstrosity of his mana. Therefore, he will need to constantly use magic to increase the number of passages and reduce the unbearable pressure on his central vessel as much as possible. Staring off into the shadows, the boy maps out his action plan for the coming years. Holding another runic stone firmly, he promises himself that until he completely masters this condition, he cannot keep absolutely anyone around. Isolation will be his only rule, guaranteeing everyone's safety under the moonlight that illuminates the large property. Right after, Hans enters the room excitedly holding a hearty tray and announces that dinner is served. The boy pays absolutely no mind, ordering dryly for him to leave, while the servant ignores the insult and says he brought his favorite wheat bread. He cuts a piece of the food with obvious annoyance, realizing the butler didn't listen to a single word he said, since the man keeps blabbering that he needs to eat properly. With a flattering and playful look, the employee refuses to leave, guaranteeing he will stay there just watching the master finish his meal. With a long sigh in front of the fireplace, the boy calmly asks what his current age is, promptly hearing that he has just turned 12 years old. Everything continues with Isaac eating and realizing he really is at the perfect age to act like a spoiled brat. At that, he holds the food, noticing that bread was baked by his nanny, as it had been a very long time since he tasted that in the original timeline. While he chews the bread silently, the butler watches him closely with a very proud and satisfied look. The MC then comments that he hasn't seen the woman around the mansion today, hearing from Hans that her son named Hinder caught pneumonia. With his fork paused at his mouth, the boy thinks deeply about the information he just received. He drops the silverware on the plate and asks point blank if the nanny had to go back home because of that. The employee explains that in any other noble family, a nanny abandoning her post because of her own child would be unthinkable. But things are going really well there under his management. Gripping the edge of the plate tightly, the young master shows a certain tension as he processes the facts. Soon he questions if Hinder was the only one to catch the disease, catching the man totally off guard with the sharp question. Looking out the dark window, Hans confirms that all the kids in that village ended up catching the same illness, leaving the boy even more reflective. Isaac soon remembers that, exactly around this time in the past, the nanny ended up losing her son due to a certain incident. That sadness consumed her so much that she once said in the past, with a blank stare, that at least this time she would depart before the young master. Faced with the rainy memory of that lonely funeral, the MC firmly decides he will not let the employee go through that suffering once again. Resting his face on his hand casually, he tries to pull from his memory what the real cause of that strange collective pneumonia was. Breaking the room's silence, he calls the butler by his name. Isaac then asks straight up what kind of monster the man hunted in that region recently. The scene cuts to a view of the calm night sky, faintly illuminated by a waning moon. In the middle of a forest covered by a thick layer of snow, a lone deer walks around looking for food. Suddenly, the small animal is hit squarely by a violent blast of magical fire. Walking through the frozen woods and holding a flame in his hand to keep warm, the MC grumbles to himself about the inconvenient situation. He continues his night journey equipped with winter clothes and a heavy backpack on his shoulders. Soon the boy passes by an aged wooden sign indicating the edge of a cliff in the area. Returning to the conversation in the dining room, Hans casually mentions the creature the team took down in the Black Goose village. Scratching his face, the butler admits he couldn't get a good look at the beast, but clearly remembers someone from the magic tower running over to buy the remains as research material. At that point, he reveals he managed to get a quick peek as the wagon carried the creature away through the village square. The monster looked a lot like a giant spider covered in silver fur, making the young master deduce the exact identity of the threat on the spot. It was undeniably a winter spider, a very specific creature from ancient magical records. Already, flipping through a book while lying on the sofa, Isaac evaluates that these bugs aren't super strong monsters in combat, but they have the terrible habit of reproducing at an absurd speed, forming massive swarms in no time. The boy concludes with a serious look that the real problem with dealing with these spiders is not brute force, but rather the lethal amount of mana they carry in their bodies. When normal people are exposed to highly concentrated mana, they develop lethal magic poisoning, which acts like a toxin slowly suffocating the victim's throat. Now deep in the night woods, the boy crouches down upon finding a greenish plant glowing near the trees. Holding a handful of these freshly picked herbs, he is absolutely certain that the village children were directly intoxicated by the natural energy the spiders release into the environment. Leaning on the cold dirt after gathering the leaves, the MC evaluates that in this era, people barely know the effects of mana poisoning, which caused all this confusion with the symptoms. With a focused gaze and taking a deep breath, he believes that amount of improvised natural medicine should be enough to take effect. Packing everything carefully into his bag, Isaac knows very well that as soon as the kids drink the brew, the worst symptoms will regress instantly. However, as he resumes his steady walk through the moonlit forest, the boy is aware that this is just a temporary relief to prevent quick losses, as the definitive cure requires wiping out the entire source of spiders in the region. His first option would be to ask his own parents for help, but Count Goethe usually spends most of his time focused on defending the border fortress. Meanwhile, the boy's mother is desperately traveling all over the continent looking for any rumor that might serve as a cure for her son's curse. Therefore, the young master clearly understands that if he just sits around waiting for their return to solve the problem, little Hinder's life will certainly end. Far from there, the humble village plagued by the illness rests in complete silence under the moonlight. In one of the most remote wooden buildings, near the edge of the trees, a faint light leaks through the cracks. Inside the rustic room, the nanny is still sitting, keeping a close eye on someone's restless sleep on the straw bed. Wearing a white cloth mask tied to her face to avoid contagion, the woman looks totally exhausted, staring down with slumped shoulders. Suddenly, the loud creak of the door opening snaps her out of her trance, making the mother turn around startled to question who is invading the place at this hour. Upon fully turning her face and confirming the identity of the middle-of-the-night visitor, the employee's eyes widen in shock. Standing at the threshold of the house entirely bundled up in winter clothes, the MC observes that she looks tired, while the woman just exclaims the boy's title in disbelief. She quickly gets up in a panic, asking what brought him so far out so late at night, questioning if some disaster happened at the mansion upon noticing the dirt on his clothes. Completely worried about the child's well-being, the nanny reaches for Isaac's face, affectionately wiping off some of the dust accumulated from the trip. Faced with that genuine closeness he hadn't received in decades, the boy just stares at her in a nostalgic silence. He then justifies that, since she missed work for several days in a row, he decided to come personally to check if everything was okay, making the woman step back quickly, asking him to return. Giving the boy a little push on the shoulder toward the outside, she warns in a panic that Hinder has pneumonia and fears he might end up catching the same darn illness. Sullenly ignoring the barrier, the boy pulls a bulky sack from his backpack and replies that with this, the situation will be fine. Without processing what is happening, the woman holds the large cloth bag while the young master tells her to take the items without questioning. Answering the mother's immense confusion, Isaac methodically explains that they are medicinal herbs, instructing her to grind them, boil them 2 times in the pot, let it cool, and then make Hinder drink the broth. Walking right past the stunned nanny, the boy takes slow steps toward the small wooden bed. Observing the several purple spots covering the sweaty skin of the masked boy, the MC immediately concludes that it is pure mana poisoning acting on his system. Overcome with despair, the mother throws herself next to the pillow, frantically calling her son's name, trying to check if the child can still hear her voice. Little Hinder's face moves slowly, opening his eyes with enormous difficulty due to the weight of the infection in his chest. Upon focusing his vision and recognizing the distinguished visitor in his own room, the little one mumbles Isaac's name and begs with the little strength he has left for the young master not to fire his mother for vanishing. Coughing weakly under his mask, the sick boy insists that abandoning her post was entirely his fault for getting so vulnerable, bringing the woman to tears of pure emotion. With a gentle but very firm look, the MC answers directly that he has no intention of sending her away for something like that. Stroking Hinder's sweaty forehead, the boy states that his mom is the only person in the world who makes wheat bread the right way, asking the little one to focus only on his own recovery from now on. With the situation in the village already stabilized, the narrative cuts to a rocky mountain trail where a huge dark hole reveals the entrance to the abandoned mine. Being guided by a local resident holding a lit lantern, Isaac confirms if that oppressive place is really a limestone cave. Having received his upfront reward, the scared villager quickly hides the coins, thanking him for the money and letting him know he's stopping the trek right there. Turning his back to the darkness, the man advises the boy to be extremely careful in there, revealing that several people had gone missing around the mountain, which earns a polite thank you from Isaac. Carefully evaluating the cave entrance, the young master reflects that, since the feared winter spiders have a total preference for limestone caves and this is the only one in the area, the chances of that hole being the main nest skyrocket. Clenching his fist until the glow of his energy escapes through his fingers, he understands he needs to be prepared for the worst before venturing into such a hostile environment. Immediately, the MC summons a considerable amount of magic, lighting up both hands and fixes his posture, telling himself that hunting time has begun. He recalls his last risky training session, remembering that by forcefully opening his circulation channels, his vessel could handle 3 spells simultaneously with the combined power of a second-class magic. However, while the flings float in the cold air lighting up the rocks, he is fully aware that there is a critical overload limit capable of shattering his entire body once and for all. Stepping alone into the cavernous space, the boy admits he doesn't know the true size of the colony waiting for him in the shadows. meaning that blindly unloading magic is a guaranteed fail. Walking slowly to a specific spot around the mountain, he decides to use some lethal help from nature to turn the tables in his favor and save raw energy. His attention turns directly to the small plant with purple leaves glowing under the moonlight, known by ancient mages as ice belladonna. Sitting there on the ground, Isaac analyzes a small plant, knowing its little berries are usually diluted to serve as an anesthetic, but for winter spiders, it is a lethal poison. He carefully plucks a handful of leaves, noticing that the plant grows in the same habitat as a very dangerous toxin. The day remains clear outside, with birds flying peacefully through the sunny sky. Already, with a small leather pouch full of the leaves and berries, the MC lets out an exhausted sigh. Looking at his own stained hand, he realizes how strong that substance is and admits he should have brought at least a pair of gloves. Adjusting the backpack on his shoulders, the boy wraps up his preparations, remembering he had already crafted enough runic stones at the mansion and that it is now time to enter the lair. With that, he steps into the darkness of the cave, lighting the path ahead with a small flame. The boy's steady steps echo across the damp stone floor. Reaching the edge of a steep drop, the young master takes a peek into the depth of that dark hole. Evaluating the massive abyss right below, he thinks to himself that meeting his end in a place like this would be a pretty pathetic way to go. Being completely sure the nest is down at the bottom, the boy gets thoughtful about how he is going to safely climb down all that distance. Then, he turns his head and ends up spotting something useful leaning against the stone wall. An old wooden ladder secured by ropes and stakes seems to lead straight to the lower part of the cavern. Wasting no time, the MC begins the long descent down the precarious steps. After a good while climbing down in the dark, his boots finally touch solid ground at the bottom. The boy fixes his posture, letting out a sigh of relief for having made it in one piece to the bottom of the cave. However, right after, a scare takes over his space at the disturbing sight in front of him. The massive hall is completely lined with glowing webs and remains, proving right away that he found the right spot. Several animal carcasses pile up on the floor like dried-up mummies, completely drained of any vital fluid. Crouching near the macabre pile, he examines a specific piece and quickly spots a human collarbone in the middle of the mess. The youngster deduces right away that this unlucky soul must be one of the missing people the hunter mentioned earlier. Suddenly, a slithering noise on the rocks catches the boy's attention. From the shadows of the cave, sinister creatures slowly start approaching where he is crouched. Keeping his cool, Isaac stands up facing the threat creeping out of the dark. He quickly summons an intense magical flame in his right hand to light up the area and keep the bugs away. Startled by the sudden flash, one of the giant winter spiders abruptly steps back. The boy realizes the monsters are terrified of fire, using disadvantage to stop any from getting close for a while. Knowing the trick won't last forever, he decides to speed up his preparations before the whole pack attacks at once. Rapidly, the MC pulls a damp cloth from his clothes and ties it around his face, covering his mouth and nose. Next, he forcefully throws the bag full of ice belladonna onto the rocky floor. Kneeling before the dropped package, the boy gets ready as the spiders slowly start to surround him from behind. He points his index finger at the plants and shoots a small magical spark. The fire consumes the package instantly, burning the poisonous leaves rapidly. A thick, greenish smoke starts rising from the fire, spreading the toxin all over the cavern's air. It takes almost no time for the smoke to hit the curious monsters, who start feeling the poison's effect immediately. The creatures' bodies twitch and recoil violently, already suffering from muscle paralysis and asphyxiation. Seeing that the plan worked and the bugs are getting weak, the young master stands up fully determined. With energy intensely overflowing from his body, he declares that the hunt has finally begun. Far from that damp mountain, the scene shifts to a memory from the past, where Isaac was sitting quietly in his office at the mansion. While the boy tried to focus on his studies, an angry yell coming from the courtyard echoed, asking how they let the situation get so bad. Bothered by the yelling invading his space, the young master gets up and walks over to the large window to take a peek. In the courtyard below, a furious man argues with Count Gerda, totally ignoring the guard's warning to watch his words in front of the lord of those lands. The resident steps forward full of rage, claiming he is just questioning why the lord failed to protect his own people. Shouting, the guy demands to know why they abandoned the Black Goose village, causing a huge uproar that annoys the boy at the window. Finding it all unbearably loud, the MC simply turns his back on the commotion and closes the curtains. Sitting back in his comfortable chair, he lets out a tired sigh and thinks he should have those windows boarded up. However, the boy soon changes his mind and figures it would be much more practical to move all his things to the basement at once. He concludes that down there, the environment would be much quieter, with no one around to interrupt his research on his unusual constitution. Flipping through an old document, the boy decides he will line the walls of his new room with dimagitrium, a super tough mineral that would help contain his dangerous mana blasts. Excited about his own idea, he lifts his face with a calm expression and asks for his loyal butler's opinion. However, looking toward the open door, the boy notices the hallway is completely empty. A heavy silence takes over the room as the bitter reality starts to sink in again. With a weak voice and a lost look, he murmurs to himself, remembering the servant's tragic fate. Totally alone in the grand luxurious office, the MC lowers his head and quietly goes back to focusing on his notes. The quill scratches the paper with aggressive speed, revealing the internal turmoil he tries to hide. Without stopping for a single second, he keeps writing frantically, fighting to push those bad memories out of his mind. The ink marks the pages restlessly in a mechanical and obsessive rhythm, his eyes unfocused in the dim light, carrying all the trauma of the losses and the prolonged isolation. The entire room seems to swallow the boy in the lonely darkness, leaving only him and his piles of books. Back in the present, inside the smoky cave, the young master stays crouched, watching the toxin do its work. With the cloth mask protecting his face, he laments that his mind always ends up digging up these old, moldy memories when he gets a little distracted. Looking ahead, the boy notices the winter spiders are already dropping stiff to the ground, proving the ice belladonna worked perfectly. He explains mentally that you can't force a bug like that to eat poison, but burning the plant ensures the smoke spreads the toxin, numbing them all until they suffocate. Prepared for his own trap, the MC recalls he covered his face with the damp cloth precisely to block the worst of the contaminated air. Next, he used the fierce circulation of his own mana to purify any toxic residue that dared enter his system. Taking advantage of his enemy's vulnerable state, the boy creates an intense fireball and compresses it in the palm of his hand. Using his refined skills, he multiplies the spell, creating several flaming spears floating all around him. Controlling 3 different spells at the same time in separate magical channels, he guarantees that this advanced technique was what bought the necessary time until the poison took effect. Now, with the targets practically taken out by suffocation, the young master just snaps his fingers to say goodbye to the creatures. The fire spheres shoot out in a continuous barrage, causing a devastating explosion that incinerates the monsters instantly. The fire consumes the entire hall's floor, melting the webs, while the boy walks unharmed through the blazing trail of his magic. Showing zero pity for that elimination, he keeps his cold eyes focused on the remaining darkness. He quickly notices the few surviving spiders are running desperately towards a single spot in the cave. Knowing the survival habits of these creatures, the MC figures out right away there must be some water source at the end of that tunnel. He then starts following the monsters, while thinking that the poisonous plant burns well, but if he stayed there, he would end up choking on the smoke, besides the unbearable heat. With that, he decides to take off his heavy coat, thinking it is better to just wrap up this hunt quickly. Walking deeper into the cavern, the scenery changes entirely to a dark tunnel lined with giant ice rocks. The boy carefully advances over the mirrored floor, holding a flame in his hand to light up the frozen path. At that point, an intense cold hits his body, making the MC shiver and bitterly regret leaving his winter clothes behind. Looking at the floor under his boots, he notes the temperature of that tunnel dropped absurdly fast to form ice like that. Looking up mid-walk, his attention is captured by a bizarre sight. Countless giant spherical sacs are stuck to the damp ceiling, making the young master marvel and wonder if those are all monster eggs. Realizing the absurd amount of hoarded cocoons, it finally clicks, and he deduces the creature responsible for that nest must be gigantic. At that exact moment, an instinct of extreme danger takes over the boy, whose eyes widen as he feels a crushing presence approaching. Several heavy ice spikes crash down from the ceiling with violent force, exploding on the ground right next to where the MC is. Startled by the sudden crash, the boy hastily looks up to try to spot the enemy in the dark. A colossal shadow starts to slowly descend from among the hanging eggs, revealing the owner of the territory. Wasting not a single second, the boy jumps backward and quickly summons a fireball in his hand, getting ready for the inevitable showdown. Taking advantage of the safe distance, he hurls the flame straight into the darkness to light up and burn the thread all at once. The fireball flies, illuminating the freezing tunnel and revealing parts of the spiky and massive silhouette. The boy lands firmly on the slippery floor, keeping all his attention focused on the target to assess the damage. However, tension takes over his childish face upon seeing the useless result of the direct attack. The colossal winter spider queen emerges from the darkness totally unharmed, covered by a solid ice carapace that completely brushes off the flames. Facing that imposing monstrosity, the MC's eyes widen as he instantly realizes the size of the problem he just got himself into. The creature lets out an ear-piercing shriek and charges forward furiously, forcing the boy to throw himself to the side and slide across the ice to dodge certain doom. The violent impact of the beast's armored leg shatters the cavern's frozen surface, kicking up a cloud of debris as Isaac barely escapes. Annoyed by the chase, the young master curses mentally, stating that his bad feelings unfortunately never miss. Facing the monster head-on, he clearly confirms that this is indeed the ruling queen of the entire frozen nest. He quickly remembers that, unlike the smaller spiders, this brutal species has a natural resistance to fire and emits a terrifying cold, which perfectly justifies its name. Agilely backing up a few more meters, the boy braces himself with one hand on the floor while the giant creature already turns its body to keep up the assault. To try and buy time and room to maneuver, he swings his left arm, firing a fierce cone of flames at the bug. The fire explodes right in the beast's face, lighting up the whole cave, but the thick armor absorbs all the shock without taking a single scratch. Seeing the shameful ineffectiveness of his basic magic, the MC lowers his hand, concluding that little fireballs won't incinerate this tough-shelled spider like they did with the offspring. But analyzing the monster walking towards him, he notices the only advantage in that battle is that the queen is quite slow to move due to her massive weight. In that tense instant, a strong dizzy spell hits the boy, who closes his eyes, feeling his own body scream for help from the accumulated exhaustion. He is fully aware that fighting using the fragile body of a 12-year-old child with no real battle experience comes at a huge cost, even more so staying up all night burning magic non-stop. Before he can recover from feeling unwell, one of the spider's giant fangs rises, threateningly ready to slice the intruder in half. Surprisingly, face to face with imminent danger, a random and peaceful thought crosses the young master's racing mind. Trying to calm the nerves of the deadly fight, his mind wanders, seeking a comforting memory of home. The image of soft slices of wheat bread served by the butler Hans pops up brightly in his head. Remembering the delicious taste that filled the monotonous afternoons, the boy thinks that getting that refined food in a completely frozen northern region, where pure wheat doesn't even dream of growing, was a true miracle. All that pampering was only possible because his dedicated nanny traveled weekly to a distant town just to get quality wheat, all because he was a picky child who refused to chew rye bread. Remembering that silly and exaggerated worry draws a discreet, nostalgic smile on the boy's face, completely pushing away the heavy dizziness. Fired up by the set idea of making it back home, he quickly pulls out the old iron shovel he carried on his back, determined to ask the woman to bake a giant batch when he returns. Gripping the tool like it was the best sword in the world, the boy scatters several flaming spheres around him, taking a firm and decisive stance. Totally focused on the giant opponent, he states with conviction that, majestic queen or not, at the end of the day, that ugly monster is still just a regular spider. With a raw burst of energy from his feet, Isaac charges at the creature in a swift and lethal sprint. The tip of the shovel tears through the cold air and lands square on the ice floor with an impressive force calculated to the millimeter. The crash shatters the frozen surface, creating a crater and kicking up a literal storm of sharp shards around the distracted beast. Using the curtain of shattered ice to hide, the MC takes a huge leap toward the monster, raising the iron shovel above his head. His sharp eyes glow with killer focus, locking his aim right on a vulnerable spot on the queen's massive armored shell. Coming down like an angry comet, he drives the tool's blade with all the force of his jump into the side of the wild creature. The heavy impact of the strike stuns the monster by surprise, making the giant spider jerk its head violently in pain. The queen lets out a deafening roar of fury and rears her colossal body backward, while the boy lands precariously on top of one of her front legs. Giving no chance for a crushing counterattack, Isaac throws his body back, jumping away quickly before the beast's fangs can reach him. The boy lands on his back, sliding skillfully across the cave's slippery floor, creating a huge distance from the furious target. He then grabs one of his legs while telling himself angrily that he needs to push through the exhaustion and cannot fail now. Staring at the bug getting back up, he quickly realizes that throwing little fires from afar is pure wasted mana, since he lacks accuracy and the spider resists random spells. Changing his attack strategy, he concentrates a massive vibrating fireball in his left hand, giving up on playing sniper from a distance. This new magic is quite different from the previous ones, as the MC creates the regular flame and immediately starts crushing the spell's volume brutally. Pushing his magical energy to the absolute limit, he squeezes the fireball once more, turning the red spell into a small incandescent blue star of pure destructive heat. With his face lit up by the lethal brightness, all the anger trapped in the child's chest rises violently. In an explosive leap forward, Isaac shoves the blue sphere with both hands straight into the center of the monster, yelling like crazy for that darn spider to perish once and for all. The contact of the compressed magic causes an instant, deafening reaction, swallowing the entire queen in a blinding flash that blinds anyone around. Making an insane effort not to be blown back, the boy clenches his jaw in pain while keeping the magic pressed against the scary monster's hard chest. The compressed spear can't take the pressure and detonates violently, generating a colossal pillar of blue flames that blows through the spider's body from the bottom up. The sheer power of the blast is so strong that the queen's tough armor gives way and shatters entirely, throwing giant plates of ice all over the cavern. Blown away by the brutal shockwave, the boy tries to pull back the arm that fired the spell, but frustratedly reports that the limb is shaking so much from its physical limit it feels frozen in the air. Yanking it brutally, he finally forces his numb muscles to obey and pulls his free hand out of the magical smoke. Feeling his own weight vanish, the MC plummets toward the abyss, letting out a sigh of relief for pulling off the reckless plan without losing an arm in the process. The young master's body falls on his back in a gentle spin through the air, completely drained of energy, while the sea of blue fire loses its strength and reveals the fried carcass of the gigantic spider. Smacking hard against the uneven stone floor at the end of the fall, the boy puts up no resistance and simply passes out on the spot from fatigue. Glowing pieces from the frozen ceiling rain down softly through the hall as if it were melted glass dropping. In the exact spot where the queen was disintegrated, a mysterious crystalline core floats on its own, radiating a hypnotic blue light amidst the leftover sparks. Some unknown amount of time goes by, and the MC wakes up dizzy, staring at a wooden roof swaying back and forth, mumbling confusedly about where he ended up after the insane fight. Still a bit groggy, he hears the butler Hans's squeaky voice frantically asking someone what on earth he should make up if people found out about the extreme craziness the young master had pulled off. The nanny sitting on the other side of the carriage calmly answers the anxious employee, asking if he really thinks no one in the village noticed the boy marching toward the abandoned mine. She clearly points out that a local hunter served as a guide at the start of the trip, but that soon after the boy vanished into the darkness on his own, leaving everyone clueless as to how the story ended. Now out of his head and walking back through the brightly lit real world, Isaac plainly states that he survived the fall, woke up shortly after with a massive headache, and calmly walked right out of the mine until he found the way to the village. Reaching the village entrance, he bumps into the butler Hans, anxiously pacing back and forth. The man grabs the boy in relief, while the young master makes up that he just fell asleep right there. Already lying in bed and bandaged up, Isaac recalls how desperate Hans was, saying he had suddenly vanished. The MC figures that this is exactly the kind of person the butler is. He knows the servant has been totally on edge since the days of the magical blasts. Just then, a maid catches the butler's attention, who looks relieved to see the boy is finally awake. Sitting up in bed, the boy wants to know how long he was out for and finds out he slept for half a day, but quickly reassures everyone, promising he can handle himself. However, the nanny doesn't buy that story and says angrily that merely handling himself isn't enough. Indignant, she questions why in the world he went alone to such a dangerous place, forcing the boy to look away and make up a lame excuse that he just slipped while looking for herbs nearby. The mood lightens when the subject shifts to Hinder, the sick boy from the village, who is already doing much better thanks to the plants the young master delivered. Hearing this brings genuine relief to Isaac. He thinks it is best to keep the whole mana poisoning story a secret, because if the higher-ups found out and sent scholars to investigate the bodies in the mine, it would turn into a huge headache. But the nanny remains suspicious and wants to know how he knew about those herbs, if not even the doctor sent by his dad knew, and he gets away with it by saying he just read about it in a book. Cutting the topic short, Hans lets them know it is time to head back to the mansion, mentioning that it even started snowing outside. The MC simply agrees in his head, knowing that if the news that he left the estate leaks, things are going to look really bad for the butler. Before they leave, the nanny walks over and hands a heavy basket to the boy. Inside, there are several large, shiny apples, a gift from the villagers to thank him for his help. The young master stares at one of the fruits silently for a moment. Without beating around the bush, he tells the nanny to take about 1 week off, since she wouldn't be able to work properly until her son is completely cured. The woman is surprised by the generosity and asks insecurely if that wouldn't cause trouble with the head butler. The boy gives a confusing answer, asking who said she would just be off for nothing. Holding up the red apple, he simply orders her to use that time to make jelly out of the fruit. She asks if he really wants jelly, and he confirms, telling her to bring the sweet spread along with wheat bread the day she returns to work. Catching on to the boy's weak excuse to help her out, the woman feels her eyes water. A sweet smile of pure gratitude forms on her face. Trying to play down the good deed, the MC quickly suggests that an apple pie wouldn't be half bad either. The nanny's soft voice agrees with the idea as the night falls peacefully over the village. The days start flying by after this event. 1 week goes by in the daily routine of the massive Goethe family estate. During this time, the young master doesn't sit still and spends his time running tirelessly around the courtyard until he's out of breath. His dedication to his daily exercise brought significant changes to his body in this short time span. While running all sweaty, he notices that his internal mana vessel has also gone through some interesting transformations. The 3 magic energy channels he had before ended up expanding to 4, all thanks to his body's improved stability and also the fact that he pushed his skills to the absolute limit during the fight against the spiders in the mine. The continuous physical effort from that morning run helped a lot with this whole process. He is completely aware that casting magic requires a lot of mental calculation and that a strong mind absolutely needs a tough body so it doesn't break down. After all, the only reason he burned out so fast in that dark cave was because his current physique is still that of an untrained kid. Looking back on his past life, he remembers that the guy responsible for training his physical endurance with a wooden sword was the servant Lucas. The image of his friend smiling kindly during training comes up clearly in his mind. Gripping his own shirt, the MC feels the weight of that sad memory. His thoughts are cut short by the approach and formal voice of the head butler, Schiller. The gray-haired man lets him know the day for his routine medical checkup has arrived, bringing a doctor along with him. Stopping his run, Isaac faces the family's old and elegant employee. Right behind him, the private doctor hired by the boy's father gives a polite bow. Despite being the most sought-after doctor in the neighboring regions, the boy knows full well that man never even came close to truly understanding his body's magic problem. Examining the boy, the doctor comments in surprise that he can't find anything wrong and that, in fact, his health seems way better than before. Putting his shirt back on, Isaac watches the scene somewhat bored, noticing that the man loves jumping to conclusions without understanding a thing. The doctor then opens the leather briefcase he was carrying. Inside, glowing vials hold a bright purple liquid, a famous potion known as panacea, which he claims is used to stabilize the flow of mana. Holding the small bottle, the boy realizes his dad really spares no expense when it comes to giving him the absolute best. He knows that in the common tongue, the potion's name means cure-all, being widely used as a tonic by normal folks and as a stimulant by soldiers on the battlefield. The funny detail is that this whole story about stabilizing energy is a massive misunderstanding born from a translation error in an ancient language. The real effect of that liquid is violently speeding up magical flow, making the potion a fatal poison for someone who already possesses uncontrollable energy, like his. However, given his body's currently adjusted state, that supposed poison ends up becoming the perfect push he needs to open up new mana channels. With the pointless checkup over, the private doctor walks away across the stone courtyard. With the man gone, the young master locks eyes with the head butler, who remains standing there in silence. Breaking the quiet mood, the boy asks if he has something to say, pointing out the old man is unusually quiet today. After all, He clearly recalls how the butler used to lose his temper and dish out serious lectures in the past. With a smirk, he pokes fun at the situation, wondering if he should have thrown a fit over something. The gray-haired gentleman straightens his posture, keeping a completely serious look behind his glasses. Straight to the point, Schiller reveals he heard the story about how the boy cured the sick kids in the neighboring village. The news catches the MC off guard, who instantly figures out the old man wrung the truth out of poor Hans. In a strict tone, the boss warns that if this stunt reaches the public's ears, the family council won't let it slide by any means. The boy listens to the warning quietly, grasping the seriousness of it. In a show of loyalty, the butler guarantees he will cover up the whole thing just this once, but strongly requests the boy keep better control over his actions going forward. The old employee's sharp gaze shows an admirable level of competence. Observing his firm attitude, Isaac reflects that, even in his previous life, he never managed to bond with that man. He always just seemed like a rigid, cold old guy who made it a point to keep everyone at a safe distance. Still, before dropping the subject, Schiller advises that if the boy really can't keep quiet, he should at least ask for his help before taking action. That unexpected little opening totally flips the MC's view of the employee. He remembers something his brother Jonas had told him a long time ago about how that man faithfully served the Gotha family since the time of the previous lord. His loyalty ran so deep that, even when the whole family fell apart and the mansion was destroyed, the old man stood his ground at his post until the day he passed. With a kind smile of someone who finally figured out the butler's closed-off heart, the young master genuinely thanks him for the advice. The direct and polite answer leaves the bespectacled gentleman slightly caught off guard and a bit awkward. Changing the subject quickly to brush it off, Schiller asks the reason for such dedication to the daily runs around the courtyard. Isaac just looks away calmly, recalling that every mage in history who reached the 5th class also had to train their own body. The boy stands up radiating a powerful energy, wondering to himself if his current physique would already be up to handling all that limit. Far from there, the tip of a fountain pen glides quickly across paper. Sitting in his dimly lit office at night, Schiller drafts a report confirming that the young master completely cured the kid's pneumonia. The butler ponders that the boy's condition still hinders him from freely using magic, but strongly believes he has a bright future as a scholar or alchemist. Finishing his writing, the old employee feels confident that this good news will finally bring a little peace to the lord of the family. A knock sounds on the office door, and Schiller tells the person to come in. The door opens, revealing the maid Rosa with a tense expression, and the boss immediately recognizes the girl. Wringing her hands nervously, the young woman addresses her superior, apologizing for the interruption. She reports with concern that the mansion maids keep vanishing without a trace, highlighting that the employee Annette was extremely dedicated and hadn't taken a day off in 3 years. With a face full of distress, Rosa states she is absolutely sure something terrible happened to her coworkers. The scene then shows us the missing maid, tied up out in the middle of nowhere. Thinking back to a recent conversation, the young woman remembers a friend's suspicion regarding the bizarre situation. At the time, during the day, the maids were chatting in the courtyard about the disappearance of 3 maids in just 2 months. But the servant Bill was casually sweeping the floor and argued that the Goethe estate wasn't an easy place to live. The guide justified the disappearances by pointing out the harsh northern weather, bandits, and monsters, taking the chance to tease his coworker, asking if she would be running away soon too. The blue-haired employee fired back right away, arguing that Annette would never bail without saying anything because she badly needed the money for her sick father's meds. Mocking the situation with pure cynicism, the guy suggested the girl was probably just sick of taking care of the old man. Annoyed by his insensitivity, Rosa told her coworker to shut up while he kept hinting that the employee must have run off with some guy. Laughing, the servant said it was just a joke, but quickly shifted his tone, asking them to listen to a theory he had cooked up. Stepping closer with an air of mystery, the young man started whispering his dark idea. He suggested the disappearances were tied to heavy black magic rituals. Pointing at the massive castle, the man recalled that the Gothis were a bloodline of powerful mages. The guy used the young master's health condition to back up his point, questioning if the lord of the house wouldn't cast any forbidden spell to save his own son's life. Shocked by the guess, the maid covered her mouth, realizing he was talking about sacrificing live girls. Threatening the girls in a mean way, Bill warned them not to spread rumors, even while claiming his theory could be totally spot on. Rosa didn't just take the accusation silently and stood up for the Count's character, throwing it in the guy's face that the Lord was good enough to take in even a criminal like him. Someone then walks up to them, and this person comments that that story was quite interesting. Standing right there with his arms crossed, Isaac stares down the employee, demanding to hear more about that topic. The servant explains that it all started exactly 2 months ago, and that the first one to mysteriously go missing was the maid named Hilda. A few weeks after the first case, the second victim was Clara, who vanished without leaving a single clue. Inside the office, Bill finishes reporting everything to the MC. Isaac then asks if he had any idea what the reason behind all that was. The servant tried to act tough, staring back at the boy, but ended up backing down and denying knowing anything at all. To try and win him over, the MC promised he wouldn't punish him if he spilled the whole truth. Standing in front of the long desk, the guy hesitated for a second, gulping nervously. The young master took the lead, asking if the servant's fear was due to him being around. Scratching the back of his neck, looking visibly nervous, Bill admitted that the answer to that was kind of obvious. He used the butler Hans as a prime example, pointing out that the man is the one who tends to the boy closest and is always covered in bruises. Chuckling disrespectfully, the servant confessed he bet anything that poor old man wouldn't have a peaceful end. However, it suddenly clicked for the guy, realizing in panic that he had just directly insulted the family by making that mean remark. With a deadly look and his face shadowed, the MC calls the employee's name in a threatening tone. Completely terrified, Bill screams, begging for mercy in pure desperation. Down on his knees, the employee cries, saying he isn't even married yet and doesn't want his life to end at all, while the boy watches the scene quietly. Resting his chin on his hand calculatingly, Isaac proposes the guy do a special job for him in exchange for keeping his life. Surprise replaces the dread on the man's face upon hearing the unusual offer. Outside, the night rolls peacefully over the foliage around the property. Deep in the boy's mind, blue flames start burning, bringing up old memories. Sitting in the loneliness of his dark room from back then, he clearly remembers calling the names of Enid and Rosa. The image of the brave redhead maid takes shape amidst the magical fire of his memories. Back in the present, the boy snaps his fingers, satisfied to finally recall the girl's real name. His bright blue eyes lock onto the crucial detail that those two were the only remaining maids. In the original timeline, they were the ones who volunteered to serve him right after the tragic passing of Hans and the nanny. The painful memory takes him back to the day he threw a glass vial on the bedroom floor, smashing the potion into 1,000 pieces. Drops of blood dripped onto the fancy rug, while the two maids cowered in fear near the door. Back then, the Isaac from the past yelled in a rage, kicking the girls out of the room with zero patience. He screamed for them to never bring that useless drink again, hurting his own hands in his fit of anger. In the messy memory, sweet Rosa pleaded with the young master not to give up on his own life, trying to be the voice of reason. Swallowed by the shadows of depression at the time, the boy just repeated the word hope in a heavily mocking tone. He harshly questioned what a simple maid would know about the absolute torment of carrying that lethal curse. Clenching his bloody fists, the boy asked if either of them knew what it felt like taking the life of someone you loved with your own hands. Silence hung heavy in the room until the brunette maid Enid raised her voice, calling the master in an intense and direct way. Facing the boy's pain head-on, she confessed she knew exactly what it felt like because she too carried the guilt of causing her own friend's passing. The shock hit the MC square in the chest, completely dropping his hostile act upon hearing that crazy revelation. While Rosa murmured her coworker's name in pity, the brunette girl emotionally poured out what happened. With a sad, empty look, Annette lamented that if she had just looked back once and reached out to Clara, maybe her friend would still be breathing. Taking a shaky step forward in the room, the maid let all her anguish and guilt show. Looking at the broken boy, she declared she understood his special condition, but warned that anyone could end up making a terrible, unfixable mistake. The young master absorbed every word in silence, deeply struck by the strength radiating from that ordinary woman. With teary eyes, the employee finished by saying that tragedies like that happen at least once in anyone's journey. The crushing weight of the guilt lessened in that instant upon seeing his own blood, and the boy realized that the maid's dark confession weirdly brought a huge comfort to his heart. Back to reality, surrounded by his magical mana aura, Present-day Isaac regrets not asking more questions to save those women when he had the chance. Refocusing on the current situation, the boy snaps his fingers inside the room, showing he has made his decision. A knock comes at the door right after, and Bill's voice announces it is him. Walking into the dark room, the servant confirms it didn't take long to dig up the maid's whereabouts. He explains he just asked the beggars at the crossroads a few questions, and the descriptions matched up perfectly. Straight to the point, Isaac stares the employee down, wanting to know his final answer right away. The guy reveals it is a slave trafficker ring, warning that these criminals promise a better life down south only to sell people off as merchandise later. Thinking the story sounds fishy, the young master asks why they would need a middleman if they just wanted to travel. Treating the boy with some arrogance, the servant argues you need transportation and mercenaries for protection against road bandits. On top of that, he points out the runaways would need free citizen status once they got there, doubting a bunch of women could score all that on their own. Grasping the scheme's logic, the MC agrees things make a lot of sense when put that way. Pleased with his boss's apparent cluelessness, Bill thinks to himself that a kid is still just a kid and doesn't know how the real world works. However, the man's relaxed look changes in a flash, taken aback by what the boy does next. Tossing a small pouch of coins onto the desk, Isaac hands over exactly what the employee wanted from the start. With a greedy grin on his face, the servant grabs the payment and justifies that it cost a pretty penny to make the beggars talk, which is why he ended up blowing all the travel money he'd been given. The boy calmly notes it was 20 silver coins total, equal to half a year's salary, but the guy just gives a nervous laugh, saying folks around there are pretty paranoid. Unbothered by the ridiculous amount charged, the MC makes it clear that money is not an issue. He demands to find the maids as quickly as possible, which leaves the servant amazed by such financial generosity. Looking at a document on the table, the boy asks if there is anything else the guy wants him to do, getting a yes in response. Keeping his usual chill vibe, Isaac guarantees that this time he'll hand over a fair share of the cash, asking if the employee is taking the job. The man cheers with clenched fists, convinced the boy completely swallowed his bait. He imagines he can make a killing smooth-talking the boy, seeing the master as a literal golden goose, even knowing the risk of him blowing up magically at any second. Trying to keep up his loyal ally act, Bill states you don't make big money without taking big risks, and eagerly offers to guide the young man to this broker. Letting out an excited laugh at the whole situation, the servant exclaims that life is all about high risks and huge payouts, totally killing the victorious mood. The scene cuts straight to the same man, sighing slumped over, now locked inside a damp cell wearing nothing but his underwear. Utterly desperate about the twist, he grabs the bars, yelling and having no clue how he ended up in that mess. The prisoner shrinks back in fear upon noticing the boy standing on the other side of the dark iron bars. With a cold, calculating look, Isaac silently watches the criminal while holding tightly onto his blue runic stone.